I respectfully rise and begin by thanking the Right Honourable Member from Hemel Hempstead for calling this debate, because it is a very important debate. Local radio and BBC Local Radio plays such an incredibly important role in our community. It is the go-to source for trusted news. It's a go-to source for quick news to find out what's going on in a local area. But also, it often is a voice that connects people who perhaps are lonely at home or need to just find out and have reassurance about what's happening in their local area. And if you start to make local national, then you start to lose that connection. You start to lose the voice of the community. You start to lose the impact of that. And I think when I look at BBC Three Counties, for example, in my own patch and sharing common with Right Honourable Member from Hemel Hempstead, what we hear from BBC Three Counties, and the Roberto Drive Time show, for example, is a good example of this, where they're very good at getting the right balance between holding people like us to account whilst also making sure that the voice and the truth goes out, so that they ask us what the issue is, they ask us our opinions, but also make sure that we're challenged on it, whilst ensuring that actually the facts are put out to local people. And often the work that MPs do, in the chamber here, we often talk about national issues, but actually on local radio, we talk about local community matters. In my instance, I remember on many occasions going on talking about issues such as the closure of the Prism nightclub in my patch, or about mental health and mental health initiatives that I've been doing. And it's important because you have that platform to be able to speak to people who you will see in the street when you go out, either knocking on doors or when you're at community events. But local radio also has another key role, and that also is in working within an ecosystem of creating new producers, new DJs, other people who might want to work in that industry. I know from local radio in Watford we've got fantastic local community radio called Vibe. And Vibe has people who work there who are DJs, who do community radio, but also sometimes I know that they've worked at the BBC as well. They do that to get experience, they get opportunities and work in that career. From my own perspective, I just want to divert slightly to my own passion for radio. So when I was at university, back in the 90s, I went to De Montfort University, and myself and colleagues were very involved at the time with setting up a new radio station called Demon FM. Demon FM was a student radio station. We had a lot of resistance at the time to setting up the station. I just want to name check some of the people who were involved in that, because there was Chris North, Jonathan Bowen, Emma Marston, Ant McGinley, Rob Martin, and many more, and we'd be here all day if I listed them all. But that radio station that we set up actually created a whole load of people who went on to have careers in production, went on to have careers in the radio industry, went on to work with the BBC, or with small production companies that also work with the BBC, including at local radio. And I mention it because actually I learnt through that time working on that radio station and actually having my own show. It's called Dean's Poetry Show. I was a poet, but not very many people know it. I'll just throw that out there. But the reason why I mention it is because actually you learn the behind-the-scenes work that goes on in radio. It's not just about the presenters who do fantastic work and the news readers, but actually it's all the producers behind the scenes. It's the people who do all that extra work that we may not see, the people who go out scouting for the local stories, who go and work in the local communities to find out what's happening, go and watch the Facebook posts and the others to actually uncover the real human stories that are part of our local communities. And I think that's my worry with this approach, is that if the BBC goes down this national approach to local news, to local radio, we'll lose the humanity in it. We'll lose the stories that really hit people in the heart, not just in their head, as it were, because actually this is about human connection. And I know Honourable Member from the opposite bench mentioned about loneliness earlier. This is something I've felt very strongly about, and I even mentioned in my maiden speech a few years ago, that loneliness is one of the biggest challenges we face in society. During COVID, it was BBC Three Counties and other local radio stations, but especially them, that really helped get people information, but felt like they knew what was going on at time of crisis, at time of trauma, when they didn't necessarily have their friends to go and knock on the doors of. And I've mentioned before that, we used to talk about being lonely in a crowd. and now people in the virtual world seem to be lonely in the cloud. But the truth is, actually, radio cut through that. It was an opportunity for them to sit at home, or perhaps while they're in the kitchen making their dinner, to listen to a voice that they could recognise that reassured them. One of the best bits of advice I ever heard from someone who worked in radio, when they talked about when you present, or when one presents a show, is that don't talk as if you're speaking to an audience. Talk like you're speaking to the listener. And I think that's the beauty of local radio. Local, really good DJs, and we have many of those at BBC Three Counties and our local stations, is that they talk to the listener. They reassure the individual. They make them feel they've got a friend at the other end of the line, even though they're not phoning them. And I think the measures by the BBC and the approach they're taking is wrong, because they're going to lose that. And I know my constituents will feel that. And the sad truth with these measures is that people won't know it's gone until it's gone. They won't realise it's been lost until it's too late. Because with these sorts of processes and these sorts of decisions, often made centrally, often made without real consultation, often made without people realising what they're actually going to lose, is that they're never reeled back on, they're never rowed back on, but also they're made by people sat in tall towers with very little connection to what's going on the ground. And that's the real sad truth of this. So I wholeheartedly support the debate that's been held today. I truly thank Right Honourable friend from Hemel Hempstead for holding this debate. I thank all members for standing up today, and I really do wish that the chamber was full today so that every constituency could have their voice heard the same way that we would want to be hearing voices from local radio.
And a